This is the Louisiana Chemical Association and the Louisiana Chemical Industry Alliance, which I'm the president of both organizations. And we're LCA is a trade association that represents chemical manufacturers in Louisiana. The LCIA, the Louisiana Chemical Industry Alliance, that's a group of folks, associate members of LCA, that support the chemical industry. These are people, men and women, that depend on the chemical industry for their livelihood from a business perspective. They're business owners, here mostly Louisiana businesses that rely on the industry for their businesses to grow. Today we have our annual legislative conference where we bring both groups together for a chance to talk about what's going on politically, what's the legislature doing with respect to things that could impact our business and this industry in Louisiana.
Some of the big issues that are facing the chemical industry in Louisiana, workforce, right? Do we have the workforce to come in and replace retirees and support all the expansions that have been going on? And so working with our community college, the Louisiana Community Technical College system, our universities, right, have been huge stakeholders, as well as previously the legislature to help support via funding and other mechanisms to get the people we need running our plants. Second one, obviously, is tax policy. Obviously, our state has a large budget shortfall at the moment, and so how to cover that? Industry has had to pay a significant amount of taxes to help plug some of these holes. So how does this look like forward, especially with a lot of these sunsetting in the next year? So what does a fair and equitable tax policy look like that affects our industry is certainly important. And then thirdly, for us, transportation. Getting people to and from work, being able to move our goods to and from our sites is important. We know we have a huge backlog of roads and other infrastructure projects. How do we get the funding? Looking for funding, we support funding, and how to get roads and our interstates moving. So those are three things I'd say which are key important for us.
The biggest issue is probably from a taxation perspective. The legislature is considering different tax proposals and changes to Louisiana's tax system, and those changes could perhaps make us not competitive with other states. Recently, we lost a huge project in Louisiana that went to Texas, where we're in competition for it. We want to make sure that we stay competitive, that we can grow our industry here in the state so our citizens can have good paying jobs.
The chemical industry has taken a beating in many regards over the last several years from a regulatory perspective, from a tax perspective, and we're really just going to be talking today about a new future. You're seeing disruptive change in Washington, you're seeing transformation. We need to make sure that the petrochemical industry's voice is heard, and as we rebuild things, as we reform and change things, making sure that we continue to have robust petrochemical and manufacturing capabilities in the United States, and Louisiana having the second biggest petrochemical industry in the nation. It's a major job creator for us, and we need to stop seeing this trend of watching some of these companies move overseas, and let's manufacture and build things in the United States, in Louisiana.
The chemical industry has been strong in Louisiana for many, many years, and in recent years with the falling natural gas prices, our industry has experienced great growth. And we're creating jobs in Louisiana across the United States. Right now, the United States is really putting an emphasis back on manufacturing, and that includes the chemical industry. That'll be important in Louisiana as many of our companies are looking to invest, looking to grow. It's all about creating an environment that inspires job growth right now. That's what's important for the chemical industry.
I think one of the biggest issues facing us right now is the fact that business doesn't know what to expect from the legislature and the state government. They don't know what the taxes are going to be. They don't know what the business climate is going to be. And it seems that every year we are faced with an anti-business attitude, and yet we are the job creators. So jobs will solve a lot of these problems, and more people paying taxes will solve a lot of these problems. But if you put business out of business, you can't create those jobs.
In the early 1980s, before the oil crash, Louisiana's state budget was 45% dependent upon oil and gas revenue, severance taxes, 45%. That continued until the crash in the 80s, and things started to change, and our dependence on oil and gas in the 90s shifted from, our budget shifted from oil and gas to gaming, as the Supreme Court said we have to call all these transactions that take place in Louisiana, to gaming. For the first time in the 1990s, Louisiana introduced a new revenue source from riverboats and from video poker, from land-based casino in New Orleans, and that became a new driver of what the state budget looked like. A lot of people would say, gosh, we want to be like Texas. Why can't we be like Texas? No income tax, and Texas is thriving. Well, there's a reason, obviously, for that. Back in a couple of decades ago, everyone wanted to be like Mike. Nike reminded everybody, you want to be like Mike, you want to be like Michael Jordan. Well, not everybody could be Michael Jordan. Not everybody can be Texas. With a diversified economy, a large tax base, and very little dependency on the state to do some of the primary functions of government. It's done at a local level. Texas has independent school districts, and they tax property heavily locally to fund school districts. Louisiana, it does it entirely different. And so I'm just painting this picture as to kind of why things are the way they are today. I think it's a combination of the shift in what our revenue base has been over the years, coupled with the reality that this state, rightly or wrongly, has chosen to do as much as it can for every governmental entity that exists in the state. We spend huge amounts of money, billions of dollars, on K-12 education. It's a priority for the state. But in Texas, you don't see state dollars going toward local education to the extent that it does here. It's a big number here. You don't see in other states, and particularly in Texas, as much state dollars going to local governmental needs, and these are constitutionally imposed. And so setting the stage for a discussion about why have things been so bad, and why are we at this crisis point or this flash point with the state budget, in large respect, it's because we have two what are very unstable sources of revenue for us right now: sales taxes and income taxes. And I'll talk about why that is in just a second. And we have a huge chunk of our budget that goes to local governmental projects. And that's not a criticism of local governmental entities. It's a reality of a system that got set up in the 1930s by Huey Long, who basically wanted everybody to have to come to that state capitol. Back then it was this state capitol, the old state capitol, and pay homage to the governor. Very strong constitutional authority in the governor ever since the 30s, and still exists. And so people would have to come to the state capitol to get the money. And that system got set up, a very populist system, and it's been maintained to this day, where everybody comes to the capitol looking for money, and the state has been very generous in giving it out, particularly to entities of local governments, school boards, police juries, local governmental needs, law enforcement. And in our state constitution, the state provides supplemental pay to every law enforcement officer in Louisiana. If you've got a gun, you pass a post-certified test, you're going to get supplemental pay from the state. We provide $90 million, it's in the Constitution, of revenue sharing to local governments every year. $90 million of state tax money that could theoretically go for state needs like higher education or roads, things that we're exclusively responsible for. It goes in a revenue sharing way divided among the 64 parishes. So that is the system we've created in Louisiana, rightly or wrongly, and I kind of lay that groundwork for you just to put in perspective what our system looks like right now. Now, sales taxes, I think we all would concede from a factual standpoint, economists will tell you by and large sales taxes are regressive. They hit low-income people in a disproportionate way than they would a higher-income person. We passed a fifth penny of sales tax last year to deal with the crisis that we're in. It was temporary in nature. It's going to expire next year. It's why we have this fiscal cliff that you keep hearing about and we keep talking about, because it's a very real fiscal cliff we're going to drop off of come July 1 of next year. Though that fifth penny will go away unless it's renewed by the legislature. And that's going to create, along with a couple of other exemptions that you're very familiar with, I know, in your industry, that are potentially going to roll off, creates literally about $1 billion hole in the state budget next year. That's going to mean $1 billion less in revenue that the state will have to spend. Of a total state general fund budget that is about $9.5 billion. So $1 billion of the $9.5 is going to simply go away. And when you think back to what I've said about where that money goes, a lot of it is dedicated. The minimum foundation formula for K-12 education in the state, $2 to $3 billion right off the top goes to K-12 education. Payment to law enforcement for supplemental pay, right off the top, goes to those recipient individuals. $90 million in revenue sharing, right off the top, constitutionally is gone. So by the time you address these constitutionally mandated amounts that drain the general fund, you wind up having about $3.5 billion in state general fund money to make ends meet for everything else that the state has to do, including higher education, including whatever may happen in the transportation field that's not part of the 16-cent gas tax. So you have a very significant challenge on your hands. Now, all this is taking place, this fiscal cliff is taking place against the backdrop that the Revenue Estimating Conference is telling us revenues are not coming in at the level that we thought they were going to come in. And that's been the case for the past several years. And the primary reason for that, and the economists will tell you this is not a political statement, it's nothing more than fact. Our corporate income taxes in the state are nowhere near what the projections suggest they ought to be. X number of years ago, and I can't remember the exact number of years ago, we had about $1 billion a year coming in corporate tax. But with exemptions and exclusions and credits that have been imposed and other benefits that have been created, again, primarily in the desire for economic development to help the chemical industry, the oil and gas industry in Louisiana, which is a main driver of employment, all these exemptions and exclusions and credits got rolled into law. And so now we're only seeing $200 to $300 million in corporate income tax coming in, and we're actually paying out more in rebates to C corporations in Louisiana than we're taking in revenue. Now, something's wrong with that picture. Fundamentally, from a tax policy standpoint, dispassionately, non-politically, you got to say that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If you've got a system that is excluding so much that you're actually paying out more than you're taking in, and it's a main source of your revenue, you got to rethink that. So what happened last year in the midst of a significant amount of tax dollars being raised because we changed budget policy in this new administration? We weren't spending and aren't spending one-time money on recurring needs, something that happened consistently for 8 years during the Jindal administration. The budget was, in essence, fabricated based upon money that was not coming back year after year after year. And pots were being drained of accounts that had been built up for specific purposes. They were all raided and what was called fund sweeps, and those sweeps resulted in building budgets year after year after year of recurring expenses based upon non-recurring revenue. Doesn't make any sense from a business standpoint. You wouldn't do that in your businesses. We wouldn't do that in our home finances. If you've got a one-time influx of money, you're not going to go out and obligate yourself for recurring expenses in the future that are not going to be there from a revenue source. That's what we did for 8 years, and we said, no, we're not going to do that. And we haven't done that. We haven't used one-time money for recurring expenses, and the harsh reality of that is what has led to the crisis that you keep hearing about from last year, this year, and extending into next year, because we've said we're not going to spend money that's not coming back just to kind of get by and kick it down the road. We're going to deal with reality, and it's tough to deal with reality in a governmental environment. It's particularly tough to deal with it in a state like ours where, like most states, people don't want to be taxed anymore. They don't want to pay any more than what they're already paying, and they have a lot of suspicion about whether government is spending their money in a wise way. And I understand all that, and I went through that for 16 years as a member of the Senate, talking about trying to make some changes and do some things differently. But that's the reality of what we face right now. And so here we are in this session, more than half of the session gone, and we have no idea right now really what revenue sources, if any, are going to be considered by the legislature to address what we know is a shortfall in the current year and what we absolutely know will be a shortfall in not the coming fiscal year budget, but the one after that begins on July 1 of next year, when this fiscal cliff hits. And one of the purported solutions was to create this what's called SCR 11 or HCR 11 task force, 13 people to review Louisiana's tax code and make some recommendations to the legislature in this session, a fiscal session, to try and once and for all deal with making some fundamental changes in the way Louisiana imposes taxes. And the cornerstone of that proposal couldn't get out of the House Ways and Means Committee yesterday. The bill to do that got killed. Now, the bill to do that is not an easy bill because it deals with individual and corporate income tax, and that is taboo in the minds of many legislators, particularly Republican legislators, who don't want to have anything to do with addressing income taxes, either corporate or individual. But every economist and every study that Louisiana has done in the past, and there have been a bunch of them, and the most recent one completed last year by about as independent a group as you can get. There were no elected officials on that panel. There were 3 of us who were former elected officials and still involved in government, a mayor, a former representative, and me that were on that group of 13 that spent an exhaustive amount of time over 9 months looking at best practices in every state we could find, looking at Louisiana's policies of spending and of collecting revenue and saying, what can we do to try and fix this? And is not driven by politics as much as you can to prepare a decision that's going to be made politically. And that task force came with these recommendations, the main one of which was the cornerstone of what was defeated yesterday, and that is not allowing individuals or corporations any longer to deduct federal income tax. That's a big deduction that all of us in this state enjoy, but we're one of only 3 states in America that allow you to do that.
Well, we want to start talking about the spending. Let's talk about that first. Let's talk about spending first, and then we can talk about revenue and what kind of revenue we need to cover the spending that we have prioritized, that we've sanitized, that we've got efficient as possible. But when we started the year, as soon as we finished last session, I started having meetings with groups of our delegation around the state. We set them up into various work groups. I also reached out to the Senate Republicans and started meeting with them. So through those conversations of what could possibly happen in tax reform and spending reform, it became clear to me that we really have to discuss the spending side of it, because we haven't been doing a good job of budgeting Louisiana's money that they had available to us. So told the delegation, I said, look, we have 4 choices. We could create, organize, have a plan for the session, or we could go with the governor's plan. We didn't know what it was at the time. Or we could adopt an emerging outside plan before session, or we could just walk around and stay in a state of confusion all session. So we decided to do the first thing, which was make our own plan to start the session. And let me tell you the premise of it. It's very simple. As a businessman, as someone that's been an entrepreneur, I've had more deals that's gone bad than good. I know about the value of $1, and I know how much it hurts to lose $1, especially when you almost lose your wife because of it. But I really didn't. She was a little mad because I couldn't buy her some new shoes or something at Saks one time. But the budget was, over the past 14 years, has grown in the state of Louisiana. And we did an analysis, and I wanted to go back 2 years before Katrina because that would indicate where the budget was a little more stable, where we didn't have all the federal funds coming in, where we achieved a spending level that we tried to spend to every year that included a lot of things that came in that went away. So when we did the analysis, we realized that the budget has grown faster than the economy in the last 14 years. And I know I got in a little bit of trouble for saying that because I compared it to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Well, you know, that's what I'm interested in. When I go buy a Coke or a cup of coffee, I'm interested in how much it cost, how much it went up from last week. And so are most of your families in Louisiana. I think so are most businesses, because you have to pay that inflation rate. Well, when we got to comparing this 14 years, it was amazing to me that Louisiana state government grew at an average of 4% per year, while the Consumer Price Index only grew at an average of 2.1% per year. To me, that indicated that Louisiana's economy grew 2 times slower than the budget. To put it the way I like to say it, is Louisiana's spending, government spending, outpaced the private sector 2 to 1 over the last 14 years. Well, I was taken to task by some folks in Baton Rouge and some of my favorite press and media people that I used the wrong indicator. They said you can't use CPI, and some of the economists that have been making projections on our income every year said it would be better to use maybe something like gross domestic product and a variety of things. Well, went back and looked at gross domestic product compared to that 14-year time span. The state, over that 14-year time span, the gross domestic product has only gone up 25%, while state spending has gone up 44%. So there you go. We almost have a 2 to 1 growth. So we started looking at what do we need to do to solve this problem. And several things came to mind as we were looking through the budget. We realized that with this growth, there was really an issue with trying to appropriate exactly how much the REC projected each year. So we go back and start analyzing since 2009 what has happened. We've had mid-year cuts every year since 2009. That's indicative of you're spending more money than you have, in my opinion. I can't do that in my business, and not that I'm comparing business to government, but you just can't spend more money than you have. Every year since 2009, we've had a mid-year cut. So we realized that that was a problem. We realized we're spending too much money. We're way over what it was last year, or the last 14 years. And then we looked at this year that we're in right now, 16-17 compared to 16-15. And this might shock you a little bit, but the things that we did as a legislature last year, state general fund appropriations are up 7% this year. From 16 to 17, they're up 7%. That's a total of $618 million more we're spending in the state of Louisiana out of state general fund in 1 year. State effort, which is what I like to look at, is because there's no one-time money reflected in that. Most of that one-time money you keep hearing about has already been taken care of, because state effort is the accumulation of all of our fees, all of our taxes, and everything that the state brings in. State effort appropriation was up 5%. We're spending $816 million more this year. Now, this is after the mid-year cut. I'm taking this off of March 1st, effective our existing budget. We're spending $816 more than we are last year. Then we have a total means of finance that we look at. That's everything: federal dollars, state effort, and of course state general fund. We have budget authority of 13.59% more than last year. Now, I understand that Medicaid expansion is in there sometime. At some point, I think that chicken's going to come home to roost, which really concerns me. What is going to be our FMAP? What's going to be our match rate? Don't know what Trump's going to do with it yet. We don't know what the House bill even looks like yet. We're trying to analyze that. But imagine that our total means of finance budget is up $3.6 billion than just the year before. That is scary to me as a legislator. I think it's scary to you as a businessman. And I think it's indicative of some of the problems that we have in getting our hands and grasping this problem. So what happened when we ran that trajectory out? Well, I can tell you, if you run the spending trajectory out and you base it on the last 14 years of data, we would be having to come back to you, the taxpayer, and you as business, and we would have to use the police powers of the state of Louisiana to extract more money out of your pocket every year to pay for this. I think that we need to do things a little differently now, and I think we need to start the conversation differently. We need to talk about spending, and we need to talk about efficiency, and we need to talk about how we're using your money that you send to Baton Rouge, instead of talking about let's just layer more money on top of bad policy and bad spending and bad efficiency. That's the premise. That's where we are on the House side, and that's what I'll discuss for a few minutes of what we did in appropriations. What we're looking at, when we sat through appropriations for weeks, and let me tell you, that's not easy, especially for somebody that likes to be up running around, maybe be on a tractor or doing something. But when we sat through appropriations, we heard a lot of different stories. Did you know that the federal government estimates that we could possibly have $1.4 billion worth of Medicaid fraud per year in the state of Louisiana? Did you know that? They said that. LDH said that in appropriations. And that's before the expansion. Did you know that we bought an airplane, the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries bought an airplane without looking at it, and the very next month they had to put it in the shop for maintenance for $500,000? Did you know that? Did you know that LDH was audited by the legislative auditor, and there was $24 million that they misappropriated and basically lost? I bet you didn't know that either. I bet you didn't know that the state of Louisiana is owed $1.6 billion that we haven't even collected in taxes and other things that are due to us. I bet you didn't know that there could be as much as $100 to $200 million in sales tax that is being collected by retailers and not being remitted to the state every year. Did you know that? Well, would you rather me go looking at that or tell you that I'm going to come and extract more money out of your pocket and just layer it on top of that kind of inefficient work? I think you as a business person, every taxpayer that I've talked to has said, please look at those things first. Look at that, solve the spending problem first, and then let's look at revenue. Am I saying we don't ever need revenue? No. Do we need tax reform? Yes. We need it badly in many ways. But, you know, the old adage, who came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know. That's God's problem. But when it comes to fiscal responsibility and what we do on a budget, spending comes first, because if you didn't have spending, you wouldn't need revenue. Isn't that right? So we need to make sure that we're spending our money right and we're spending it efficiently. So what did we do this year? We went through appropriations and we worked diligently to look at some of these things. But I had given the delegation an option at our retreat a few months ago of a plan. And that plan was, and this came out of a lot of study groups in our own delegation, that plan was to go with a standstill budget. I just reported to you that our spending was up 7%. 7% state effort over this year, 16 to 17, $800 million more dollars being spent. I ask you a question, why can't Louisiana spend the same amount of money in 18 that they're spending in 17? After all, they're spending in just 1 year almost 3 times the inflation rate. And in some inflation rate indicators actually say it was a negative last year. So we're spending maybe up to 7 times more than the inflation rate. Why can't Louisiana spend the same amount of money in 18 that we're spending?
I think we heard some really good and diverse opinions about the struggles that are going on over right down the street at that big building from Jay and from Lance. I think they both reflect the differences that are now playing out in the House of Representatives and will play out for the remainder of the session. So what do the people think, I wonder? You know, citizens out there in the state. American Strategies did go ahead and do the polling. They are a national polling firm. This was conducted in early March. 600 Louisiana voters who had turned out at the polls to vote in the previous November election. So we knew they were real voters and so forth, and demographically correct, of course. They were asked to provide one reason the state continually falls short of raising enough revenue to finance its annual budget. And as you can see up there, 70% said poor fiscal management and overspending by state government. And there are a number of other polls over the last few years, if you go back and look at them, with one exception, the LSU poll, that basically says this is a problem, poor fiscal management and overspending by state government. That's what most Louisiana citizens think of their state government. 19% blamed a slow economy, low energy prices, and declining tax revenues. Of course, that too is true. The state is in a recession. The exception is the chemical industry in the Lake Charles area and up and down the river, and all of the many expansions going on and the job hires that are occurring. So we've offset some of the state's difficulties. Of course, the legislature has passed temporary taxes over the last couple of years of close to $2 billion, and most of that came out of the business sector, including manufacturing. We hope that they come up with a long-term plan that perhaps can relieve some of that additional taxation that we've faced over the last couple of years. We know they're struggling. We know they have to find some solutions. We hope we can help. But at the same time, our individual manufacturing facilities can't afford more heavy tax burdens.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the downside and the upside of infrastructure here in Louisiana, and as businesses that operate here, you know firsthand what they are. As citizens who travel the road, you know what they are. We're going to talk a little bit about why we should invest in transportation, give you a brief overview of the task force, and then talk about the path forward, either direction. We can either go forward or we can spend time in the rearview mirror, which is the smallest mirror you're going to find in your vehicle. So what's the downside? Where did we go wrong? I will tell you, we had decades of delayed investment here in the state of Louisiana, and I'll show you what that means in a minute. We've had political selections of projects, which means we're not making data-driven decisions, informed decisions for our future. And we've not always followed the best practice. And as a policy guy, not as an engineer, not as a lifelong DOTD person, but with the last 12 years, I will tell you, if I look at what we've done, those three things sum up the place where we are in terms of our infrastructure. So let's dig into that very quickly to tell you what that means. We're on top of the absolute wrong list. If you see Louisiana right here, that means it's been 27 years as of January 1st since we've adjusted our gas tax. The only states that are above us are Illinois, Tennessee, they're now below us. They just passed a gas tax the governor will sign. South Carolina, they're now below us. They're going to sign their gas tax. That leaves Oklahoma, Mississippi, and Alaska having gas taxes older than what you have here in the state of Louisiana. And also, as a policy guy, I will tell you, we did it wrong. We did it wrong when we first passed it, because a part of that process, we talked about indexing it. Now I'll share with you what the implications of that will be. But as of January 21st, 22 states have gone 10 years, 16 states had gone 20 years, and only 5 states had gone nearly 3 decades without adjusting their gas taxes in terms of how they invest in infrastructure. Here's our model. I talked about how we did it wrong. In 1989, when you passed 16 cents of a gas tax, we didn't index it. Today, it's lost 56% of its value, which means it spins like it's 7.5 cents. And if you go back and price a coffee, price a cell phone, if there was such a thing, price a television, price a gallon of gas, price the cost of doing business back in 1989, and live there. That's very difficult. If we asked each and every one of you, especially my friend Jim, to go back and get paid to do what you were doing today, to get paid what you were getting paid in 1989, he'd have filed bankruptcy a long time ago. But that's the reality. That's what we're forced to live with as your Department of Transportation. We didn't ask for it, we didn't create it, but it's the situation that we have inherited. And this issue about a bridge being out, you all know, if you're in the river region, what happened on LA1, 55,000 cars a day. We had to lower that to 15 tons. That means a garbage truck could not cross that bridge loaded. A beer truck could not cross that bridge loaded, and it had 55,000 vehicles a day. And the issue was we had 41 angles on that bridge that were cracked, that would open and close like a hanger bending as a vehicle rolled over that bridge. And we had to replace every one of them. Unexpected cost. It's costing me $4 million out of my budget. We pushed this back 3 years to replace this bridge because of this issue of not having money to be able to deal with it. So the cost of doing business for you will increase every time you have to go to Sunshine Bridge and carry a load to cross the river out of Baton Rouge. That's a problem for us. That's a problem for our economy. So I don't believe in dwelling on the bad side, so let's talk about what we're doing good. Well, there are three things that I can tell you we've done, if I can get this clicker to go. One, we have and continue to do more with less, and we can show you what that is, and I will do that. We also work to improve how we do our business, because people always accuse the department and state government of not trying to improve, and I see Gordon Nelson in the room, who was a part of that process when he worked at the department. And then we also follow national best practices. These are the things that other agencies and states are doing to get ahead of themselves. So if you look at this slide, this is our workforce efficiency. And when we talk about doing more with less, imagine shrinking your department by 1,000 people over the last 10 years. That is what's happened to the Department of Transportation. When I went to the department as an employee, we had 5,400 people. Today we sit at 4,200 people. That's less than 12 years over that time. So why should we invest now? Well, I will tell you very simply. 44 states have increased their transportation. It's now 46 states have increased their transportation investment more recently than Louisiana. And it explains the condition of our roads. We've got the 8th worst pavement condition in the country. That you drive on, that your trucks drive on, that your materials come to you. We have the 3rd worst bridge condition in the country, with over 12,000 bridges, and we're in the top 5 for having bridge deck in the state of Louisiana. And then the most alarming is that we're 5th in fatalities. We kill a lot of people on our roads, and one is far, far too many. But that explains what we get. I will tell you, we invest less than all of our neighboring states. As you can see from this chart, any SEC state is spending more on transportation than we are. And it's not just the gas tax. In other states, your vehicle sales tax is going to roads. Here, it's going to your general fund budget to pay for health care and to pay for higher education. Some of your vehicle registration is going to other things in the budget other than transportation. And all the while, the construction cost and the fuel economy gap, if I can get my battery here to work, is continually widening. We are not keeping up with the cost of construction here in the state of Louisiana, with billions of dollars of projects that we know we have to build for the system to work as it is today, and another $15 billion of projects that we would like to see. We need to close the gap, but it's going to take an investment, and it's going to take more vehicles moving and paying that tax. This slide simply shows you where we've been in this state, how we've used one-time money. Anything other than blue is one-time money. Means when it's spent, it's spent. If it's debt service, it's spent. If it's a federal grant, it's spent. This is all we have to manage our system. Here's where we were at $1.7 billion of construction, the high point. And that drop represents jobs, it represents investment, it represents value, it represents an eroding system. That is the condition of the budget at the Department of Transportation. And you've seen this slide, because everyone who's driving a car today on average is going to pay $108 a year, is all you're sending to the state of Louisiana DOTD for the ability to match funds. And that's only going to generate about $500, $600 million a year. Everything else is federal money. Everything else is match money. But if you look at the bottom of this slide, you see the things that you are paying. What I don't have on here is my phone bill. My cell phone bill for 4 cell phones and 2 iPads is $300 a month. A month. But I'm only paying $108 a year in fuel taxes. Your coffee bill, if you're a Starbucks guy like my wife or like I am, you're going to have 3 or 4 cups of Starbucks. That's going to be $25, $30 easy if you don't get any of the fancy stuff. Football games, alcohol, food, clothing, entertainment, significantly more than what you're going to pay, but all of them are dependent upon having an infrastructure system to move them. If you have an iPhone, it's been on an airplane. If you have timber products, it's been on a train or it's been on the back of a truck. It may have come through a port. If you have chemicals, they've been through pipelines that sit on our system that we maintain. We assist in those processes. Those are the realities that you spend your dollars on in the state, but you're only spending $108. And as Tom said, he participated on a task force with us, and this task force represented all industries, all entities, and all geographic regions of the state. We had elected officials, we had parish government, we had ports, we had city leaders, we had a couple of legislators, and we had Jay Dard and myself and Kim Robinson from Revenue. We had a statewide discussion. We even had regional meetings that folks traveled around and had over 750 people participate in those workshops. Those aren't things that we had. We asked those local chambers, members of the Build It Coalition, to host a meeting and just let the task force members come and listen. And we submitted our report to the governor in December of last year, and this is what they told us. They said very simply, you have a transportation spending problem. We're not spending enough money. They realize that the projects are there, the selection is there, the capacity is there. The one thing that's missing is the money. And in fact, every other blue ribbon commission we've talked about and had never looked at how do you pay for what we're asking for. This entity did that. That was our mission. The governor said, figure out how to maintain the system better and figure out how to build the things you want to build and come up with a recommendation, and that is exactly what we've done. They've told us, think about your aging bridges, because we knew LA1 is an issue. We knew Huey Long in New Orleans was an issue. We spent $1.2 billion on it, but the legislature said it was only going to cost $500 million. We know the bridge in Lake Charles is an issue. I can tell you the 700 bridges that are load posted and over 50 years old is an issue. I can tell you the 22 bridges I closed this year, the 238 bridges I closed last year is an issue. We have to deal with our bridges, because a great road with a bad bridge gets you absolutely nowhere. We said every mode of transportation is important. That's what we heard. Folks talked about being multimodal. That is a key. That is a leadership position. They said we need to empower local government, participate in the selection of projects, identify what's important to them. Because if you don't think a new bridge in Baton Rouge is important to Iberville and West Baton Rouge and East Baton Rouge and Ascension, you're sadly mistaken. So we have to think about government in terms of who we serve, not the jurisdiction that we serve. And we need to focus on both the rural and the urban areas, because the food you eat today may come from a farm in North Louisiana yesterday, and it's going to have to travel down here to get to you. If you think about that, you cannot ignore what's happening. 50% of our bridge problems are in rural areas, 50% are in urban areas. And then all of that should be dedicated to transportation. And here are our recommendations. The first three are things that we can already do. We can toll, we can do public-private partnerships, and we can do pilots and TIFs. No action necessary. All it takes is a will and leadership. We've issued an RFP for fixing I-10 from West Baton Rouge to East Baton Rouge to Ascension, had over 25 respondents to the RFI. Hugely significant. The law says it's public-private partnerships, P3s, not P-frees. Unless we have money to make a return on investment, no one's going to give me $1 to build it for us. So we can forget about fast-tracking that project if we don't have any money. That's just the hard reality. We talked about an aviation fuel tax. The aviation directors from around the state recommended an increase, of which we've had very little action, Patrick, in terms of making that happen. We talked about truck permits and truck registration fees, and this is an important one for me, because I've got some truckers paying $25 or $30 a year to carry a certain weight, and I've got others paying $500 to $1,000 perhaps to carry the same weight. There's no equity in that process. There's no fairness. It's as corrupt as other things that you've seen around the world in terms of how you do it, because it's disregarding the data and the facts. So we said to them in a new collaborative way, tell us how much you want to pay, whatever you want to pay. If you want to increase the registration $10, $15, $25, you tell it and we'll do it. And more importantly, we'll tell you, we'll bond that out, and we'll let you pick the bridges that we want to spend it on to make sure that they get done. The same silence you just heard is the same thing we heard from the trucking industry. But we're a freight state, we're a freight economy, and they're not interested in investing in their own structures. But more importantly, we said if you do that, We offset that on the diesel side. Let's not charge you for gas tax or diesel if you're going to pay something on registration and truck permits. We don't want to get you on both sides of the coin. That, to me, is pretty damn good policy. We haven't always had that, but that's what we offer. And crickets is what we got back. We can't advance Louisiana in that effort. And then the last three are policy issues. One is categorical expenditures, doing it the right way. Instead of naming 16 projects, 2 of which we have no money to deliver, give it to me in categories that will allow me to advance that and take advantage of the federal funding that might come available and to leverage other delivery models and opportunities. That is a national best practice. That is how the federal government funds our budget. That is how we can fund our budget if we got new money. And we also said index it to protect the value. So if you give me 10 cents, make sure it's worth 10 cents 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But the task force said, we don't want to tell you how to do it, we just want you to do it. We said, look at CPI, look at construction, look at the gas economy or the fuel index, come up with a model, put a floor, put a ceiling, control volatility. You all make the final decision, not the bureaucrats, not the state. Let the legislature perhaps do that, set up a committee to do that, but do something to protect the value. Because if you give me 5 cents, I want it to spend like 5 cents from now on. Because if I'm going to pay 5 cents, I want to get 5 cents worth of value. And then last but not least, we said $700 million is the figure. We didn't say 23 cents gas tax because we recognize that it's got to come from other sources other than the gas tax. We said $700 million on an average annual allocation for infrastructure spent the right way is the need. And we're not going to deny that. We're not going to be shy of that. And the project list are things that were selected under Governor Jindal. There were things that were selected under Governor Blanco. There were things that were selected under Governor Foster. They've been on our desk for the last 30 years. I'm breaking ground on 2 projects that are older than my staff in some cases. Think about that. That's not economic development. That's not prosperity, but that is where we find ourselves. So there are 3 key bills I will tell you about. And I'm not going to tell you that they're dead because they all are moving for the most part. But I will tell you, constitutional amendment number whatever it will be if it passes is Senator Cortez. We've been giving state police up to 20% of our budget, along with parish trust funds, flood control, and the port program. That's the only one that is not pure infrastructure development. The year before Governor Edwards took over, it was $700 million, $70 million, I'm sorry. We are asking, and we asked the governor to make it a policy that we not invest in state police. This constitutional amendment is a solid, good constitutional amendment because it takes state police out of the budget of DOTD. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars on paying police to patrol the roads, but not building new roads. That will put money in our budget. Now, it doesn't create any new money. It doesn't give us anything new, but it stretches the dollars that we've always had in a better and effective way. And then the second bill is Bill 598 by Abramson. It enhances the accountability of the department, where we can show you what we've done, how we followed the law, and he's put things in practice to make sure that the local leaders get to make decisions. Things we don't reject, we embrace them. We want as much transparency and accountability as we can get. But at the end of the day, this doesn't create new money. It actually, without amendments that we made and that he agreed to, it would have limited our ability to do public-private partnerships. It would have added additional burdensome bureaucracy in terms of creating quarterly reports on 1,500 projects. But we don't want to spend money on bureaucracy, but those are the things that we've worked through, and that bill is moving. Those 2 bills alone are great bills, but if we don't do the last bill, 632, that's the 17-cent bill that has yet to earn a hearing in Ways and Means, we don't get anywhere. Because having more accountability is going to cost me more money. We'll welcome moving state police out of TTF, but I can't give you mega projects A and B. I can't better maintain our roads and bridges. That is the reality. These are the three bills that have to work in tandem in order to move our system forward. The message is that the need is great and the time is now to do something. And as the window closes in terms of what we can do to fix our system and build the state that we all say that we want and need, we have to act. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take courage and leadership to overcome the 30 years of disinvestment that we've had in our state system. And our infrastructure is starting to show the weariness and the struggles of being able to be maintained with the resources that we have today.
Tell us how the chemical industry and other industries in Louisiana are in essence paying more because of Louisiana infrastructure.
Well, I can show you right now over the Intercoastal Waterway where we had to lower the posting on a bridge that carried 55,000 vehicles a day. About 15% of that are going to be trucks going to the chemical corridor south of Baton Rouge on the river. Those trucks that were crossing that river, that intercoastal canal, had an hour-plus detour one way. There's a cost of time, there's a cost of money, and that's going to have an impact on congestion for local businesses all through an already congested corridor. That's an example of the cost of not maintaining our infrastructure. The average citizen is going to pay anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 a year on additional vehicle repairs and operating cost, of which time is a very big factor. And not to mention the multimodal elements of needing to dredge, needing to build bridges, providing access for all types of freight is so very important for this industry.
What do other southern states do to address this issue?
Well, one, they act. Secondly, they invest the dollars. In many other states, they're sending general fund dollars into transportation. Here in Louisiana, we're only using the gas tax to fund transportation. And so we're 50th around the country for the overall investment. The dollars that typically go to transportation in other states, it's going to the general fund here in Louisiana. We're not complaining about that. We're saying you still have to fund us one way or another. The task force came up with a recommendation of $700 million being the figure we need, and we didn't say it all had to come from a gas tax. It will come from sales tax, it'll come from vehicle registration, it should come from permits, it should come from a number of opportunities, including tolling and public-private partnerships, but it's all going to take money and a will to really make a difference.
There are a lot of crazy things that are going on in Washington right now. And people often talk about how the pendulum swings in politics. It often goes from Republican to Democrat, conservative to liberal, swinging back and forth. And the reality is right now that we're going through a transformation. We're going through a disruptive transformation. I think that term very much applies to this president. A lot of people that I've met with, including a lot of people in this room, have expressed frustration over the last several years about much of the regulatory environment that we've been trying to deal with. Louisiana, it's no secret that we've got an oil and gas economy here. And the oil and gas industry, as many of you know, has taken a pounding over the last few years. But here's something that's amazing, and Greg and I just talked about this in Washington a few weeks ago. You know, Louisiana, we've got the most extensive pipeline network in the nation that distributes that energy that we produce here. Louisiana is one of the top 3 energy producers in the United States. We have the most advanced maritime transportation network in the nation. And we've been able to use those assets, the low energy prices, the maritime transportation system, and that extensive energy distribution network, to parlay that into an industrial revolution in Louisiana. And the petrochemical industry's been able to make record investments. Well, now we're in a situation where executive orders, where Congressional Review Act, where changes in the law are allowing us to make changes in regulations as well, where we can do things that are a little bit more functional for Louisiana, where I think there's a little bit better recognition of what the impact these regulations have, a little bit more recognition of the importance of domestic manufacturing, a little bit more recognition of the fact that Louisiana's economy is very much based upon what you do and your success or your failure, having the second biggest petrochemical industry in the nation. And so wherever you are ideologically, whatever you think about what's going on in Washington right now, I just want to leave you with one thing. We're seeing disruption and we're seeing transformative change. And so as things are discussed and blown up, we have an opportunity to give input. We have an opportunity to change this regulatory environment to something that you see as being more functional. Something where you truly base upon you truly implement regulations based upon the outcome of those or the objectives of those regulations, as opposed to just going through the process regardless of whether it yields any type of benefit. So thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here. Please, at any time where we can be helpful, where we can provide information or weigh in with agencies, let us know. We just took over a subcommittee where we have jurisdiction over the Corps of Engineers, over EPA, NOAA, and many of the other agencies that you work with on a regular basis. And so we're going to be working with those agencies very closely as we move forward to this infrastructure package, and are going to be doing some regulatory reform in there. So thank you all. The new president talked about a $1 trillion infrastructure package. I think you have few areas in the country where that's more important than right here in the capital region, and in other areas of South Louisiana where you have some of the worst traffic in the nation. And so what that means is, one, developing permitting and streamlining practices where we can turn dirt, where we can build projects faster. Number two, where we do a better job prioritizing federal dollars to make sure that we're investing in the right projects, not just building things, but building the right things, imposing the right solutions in areas. And so we're excited about the opportunity to work on this and really see monumental change.
Keep in mind that the people you see, that when you drive by a chemical plant, there's more to it than that. There are human beings behind that. There are people who live and work in that community, who coach soccer games, who contribute to the United Way. They're the folks that when disaster strikes, they go out and help their neighbors voluntarily. So they're Louisianians with good paying jobs and just want to raise their family and enjoy the great state of Louisiana.
The chemical industry, when you look around at your home, at your workplace, chemistry is everywhere, right? From the clothes to the car to the home to pharmaceuticals. We're there in every aspect of life. And so for us, not only do we provide good jobs, we provide essential things, essential services, essential things for everybody's life. And just remember that when next time you're at the store.
We are employing many, many people, and even if you can't see them in the plants themselves, as far as working for the chemical plants or the refineries, they are working for the contractors, they're working for the vendors, the suppliers. So there are many, many more people whose jobs depend on the chemical industry than just those who actually work for the chemical plants and the refineries. Banks, restaurants, dry cleaners, lots of small businesses. The schools depend on them for taxes. So there's a lot of people depending on that industry, even if it's not that obvious.
I'm excited about it. I think people are excited about the growth that we're seeing in our industry, and that means good paying jobs, but it means our state as a whole has a chance to grow and really be something special and live up to what we all know it can and will be.
If people have questions like more information, what should they do?
Well, I think they can go to our website, LCA.org, www.lca.org, and there's information there. There's contact information where you can contact any one of our staff, members of our staff. You can also get involved in some of our committees and some of our other council work.